a little early for late arrivals, but it's on time for those of us that are on time. Welcome to everybody. My name is Michelle Mashburn. I am the director here at San Jose Peace and Justice Center, and I'm presenting today on Access for All in Activism and Organizing. First of all, thanks to the center for hosting the space and for having the event here. As people can tell, there are limitations with access here in the space, and I want to be transparent about that. Fortunately, there's the lift, which enables me to work here, but there's space constraints and stuff like that. The center was formed almost 60 years ago, actually more than 60 years ago. It's funded entirely by individual donations. Space use can be done just on a donation basis for small groups or individuals interested in hosting events here. And in addition to that, for today, Together We Will has also co-sponsored this event. Together We Will is they've helped me immensely in promoting the event. They're a testament to the power of collective organizing. So Together We Will is an intersectional, feminist, inclusive, anti-racist community dedicated to progressive activism. And they are currently live streaming the event on their Facebook page as well. I imagine if we get any questions or comments, you'll be able to share them through the process. So why am I doing this class? I think for most people that I know here, you've got some clue as to how passionate I am about disability justice. I've been here since, I've been here since September 2016, and understandably, disability justice is part of what's in my heart and what I do on a daily basis. I've taken part in planning events through the center and here at the center where access was a last-minute issue or last-minute add-on. I've done other ones where access was attempted to be incorporated but then fell through at the last minute. And then I've been in some events that they've done a really good job with trying as hard as possible to be as inclusive as possible. The straw that broke my back, basically, was when a woman spoke out about lack of access at one of the smaller rallies that was organized by a group of longtime activists. And her response wasn't really fully understood. So this kind of gets to the heart of, why it's important to understand difference in our society and, why this class is important and will continue to be important going forward. What is ableism? Is anybody familiar with the term? Because I've had some ironic responses when I've mentioned it to some people before. One person said, "Is that even a word?"
It is now.
Yeah, it's a word. On the flip side of that, though, the people I've interacted with sometimes that have had those reactions are the people that are most willing to work with me as well. And I think that's important to note about the people here at the center, as well as the people in the larger community. A lot of people, and that's part of the problem of what is ableism, because ableism is about stereotypes and assumptions. And those stereotypes and assumptions are, it boils down to somebody's abilities or disabilities. And it boils down also to their outer appearance and when they appear different from what is normal in the group of people where people are. So then ableism creates discrimination and prejudice against people who are different based on that standard. Normativity comes into things. You've got people who hide chronic conditions, health conditions, and people who hide even just health concerns when they're having a crisis from families and friends because of the stigma attached to that illness or being different. And I think it's important to call it out, because you don't have to be viewed as less than just because you're dealing with one limitation or another. So ableism, stereotypes, attitudes, practices, they all create barriers. The barriers are what tend to disable a person. it is not necessarily that I use this chair, that I need this chair that makes me disabled. It's society that will make me disabled. And most people are unaware that their words, their actions, and the way that they talk in certain cases, but more their beliefs, are as ableist as they can tend to be sometimes. It's an unknowing, it's a hidden ism right now in our society. As I said, it creates discrimination and prejudice. It's based on a standard of ability. So the standard of ability, people with disabilities are often seen as less valuable, and in some cases, less than human. Eugenics stemmed from an ableistic society that saw ability and, wanted to get rid of the differences. Another reality with ableism is that it's intertwined with capitalism, with white supremacy, and with gender normativity. You get people who are different from the heteronormativity and the gender, male or female, and they are unable to find a place that they fit, but it's not because they don't fit, it's because society won't let them fit. And that's important to remember. Given that these things happen within social justice groups, one of the most common examples of how ableism is presented is when a group fails to mention ableism or disability justice in their framework and in their platform. So you get a lot of and other oppression, or you get a lot of actually no mention whatsoever. I was at a youth social justice event, and they mentioned almost every, to my knowledge, it was almost every other ism except for maybe ageism in what they were talking about, but they failed to mention the disability element, and that's kind of a sad reality. So a more close to home example is taken from the Peace and Justice Center's Unity Principles. And the Unity Principles state that we are committed to the principles of human equality, and I will get to the issue of my word with equality a little bit later, and struggle against racism, sexism, homophobia, and other forms of oppression. So other forms of oppression may or may not call out ableism in the way, or the disability, the prejudice, and the behaviors in the way that is really needed to be done. So how many people have heard the term access for all from somebody other than me? I think a lot of people here have probably heard it from me. I know that, fortunately, I've been in a position in this role to inform a group of people, and South Bay Progressive Alliance is a solid example of, they put universal design in what they believe in and in their platform statement, and I was fortunate in that sense. So access for all, to me, is about not only disability and who's able-bodied and not able-bodied. It's being welcoming and accepting and accessible to all people, whether it's somebody who's old, whether it's somebody who's young, whether it's somebody, a mother with children, whether it's a woman pushing a stroller that may need to use the lift because she can't quite carry it up the stairs. It's about making those policies and procedures that keep things accessible to everybody. So more at the heart, it's about overcoming prejudice. It's about overcoming, physical barriers that limit people's access in their day-to-day world. Almost all people encounter a barrier at some point or another in their life, but I think, for me personally, I tend to feel it a little bit more acutely than what another person might feel, unless they are also at an intersection of different forms of oppression. Disability can be viewed as a normal part of living. In some Scandinavian countries, they view disability as a natural part of life. Here in the United States, in our public health system, disability is a measure of failure. Public health could lose their funding if too many people in their programs become disabled through no fault necessarily of their own. Could be an accident, could be something that's not connected to a public health issue, but it's a reality that it can happen, and sometimes it can't be prevented. The other thing is not everybody who's disabled wants to be cured or fixed, because they don't necessarily see it as a medical issue. Universal design is here in the United States. In other countries, access for all is a little bit more prevalent as a theoretical framework. I'm kind of working within both of them. So I want to show a short video and see if I can get this to actually work correctly. There we go.
Maybe turn the lights off.
Could you flip the light behind you there? Okay.
Go to a building and there's no ramp, typically people think the problem is that we use wheelchairs, where a social model of disability would say the problem is that the building's inaccessible. And it doesn't seem like a radical concept, but it changes the fundamental way we think about disability and the work that we need to do to include people with disabilities.
People often don't understand ability to be within this kind of context and access to adaptive devices and where we are located economically. When I have my access needs met, I'm functionally not disabled, but when places have stairs and everything is built for people that stand so I can't see anything, and it's a really dark environment so I can't see anything, because as you get older your vision changes. So now I need a lot of light to see things. In an environment like that, of course I'm disabled.
I really like separating out impairment from disability. So impairment as, like physical or neurological manifestation, like what's real. I have a physical impairment. And then disability is like what society creates as barriers because of the impairment. So like as you're saying, if we're in a place where my access needs are getting met, then my impairment isn't so significant. But when it's not, because society doesn't want to, then that's a problem. So I think it's important to really think about disability and the context of what is disabling, like the environment. The last building I worked in, it was really cool because it was universally designed. So all the doors had push buttons, or they're like magically open, as you walk up, or everything is like automatically at my height. And in that place, I didn't need a lot of accommodations. But then in an environment where it's not universally accessible, where people with disabilities and parents and all types of folks weren't thought of in the design process, that's when there's problems.
I'm not saying it's easy to live with an impairment. It's not easy to live, when you have 4 kids. It's not easy to live when it's 20 degrees outside. And, for those of us in the Bay Area, 55 is freezing. But, there are times when it's just not convenient to have a body. But that's not what oppresses us. What oppresses us is living in a system that disregards us, is violent toward us, essentially wants to subjugate our bodies or kill us. That's oppressive. My body doesn't oppress me. My body's fine. But society, that can be incredibly oppressive.
I think when we focus on a person's individual impairment or diagnoses, as you said, it kind of lets society off the hook. It makes all the focus on that individual circumstance, when really ableism and exclusion and violence happen because of systems of oppression. Mm-hmm. So we know it's not like an individual person with a disability that's the issue, but we can look at the way, for example, with policing, victims of police violence are 50% people with disabilities, if not more. Or if we look at the special education system, it's not the individual special education student, but we can see how special education becomes continued segregation for so many Black and brown students. So when we focus on the individual impairment, it kind of takes away from that bigger picture.
We're seen as disposable because for those of us that are not going to have like a treatment or a cure with our bodies. And we kind of fly in the face of this idea of medicine as God. We're seen as less than, and you're awesome. You're fabulous and you are beautiful. And the idea that someone would think that you're less than is just absurd. And yet that's like the framework that we're in. And it's incredibly painful. There are always going to be crips. There are always going to be, people in pain. It's just the nature of being in a body. But the social body we can change. And I think it requires a power analysis.
Michelle, feedback from the people watching the live stream is that the sound is very fuzzy.
Turn on the lights, please.
Is your mic on?
I think it is, but it's mostly projecting into to the second room.
Okay.
Do you want to move the thing up a little bit more? Because that would probably work. So that was Patty Byrne and Stacy Milburn that were presenting on more of a social model of, I need to restart this here, social model of disability. Patty Byrne and Stacy Milburn are from the East Bay in San Francisco area. They're part of Sins Invalid, which is a social justice, is a disability justice organization that focuses on the embodiment of disability. And I learned about them when I first moved out here to California through the program that I was studying in at that point in time. And I think the video just kind of goes over the issue of how society limits me. My body doesn't limit me, as I said in the beginning, but society limits me. And then I want to talk briefly about accommodation versus access. Accommodation is often seen as the route through which I can be enabled in this world. And accommodation tends to put the burden on the individual, whereas access for all will put the burden on society. When I first learned about accommodations, they were a safety net for me. They helped me survive. They helped me get through grad school at certain points. I've heard people more recently say that their therapist or their doctor thinks that the accommodations are just a crutch for them, whereas it's technically a right based on the civil rights framework of things. So it's important. Now I kind of want to go into that whole equality versus equity thing. And some of you may have seen this image before. It's from where I got it today. It comes from Vancouver Island University. And the first image is a group of 3 people of varying sizes and shapes. And in that image, there's a barrier that prevents all except for the tallest one from watching the sports game or whatever that's going on. And this is equality, where each of them are given the same size block to stand on. And of course, you can see that 2 of the individuals can actually see over the fence, the last one still cannot see. In the second image, one of the people has 2 boxes, one person has 1 box, and the other one is standing on the ground. The barrier is still there. They can all see. However, they had to get the extra box or extra thing in order to be able to look over the fence. So the burden was on them or whoever was around at that time to make sure that they had accommodation to accommodate for that barrier that was there. In the third image, all 3 of the people can see the game because the barrier, the structural issue has been, the systemic barrier has been removed. So this gets to the whole thing of equality versus equity. And it's not enough to say we want equal things for everybody, because certain people come from different backgrounds, from different perspectives, from different experiences. And if we give them all the same tools in their toolbox, nobody's going to get any better. We've been doing that for years and years and years, especially in this capitalistic system. We think if people just work hard enough, they're gonna succeed. And that's not always the case. We can't always create success because of the systemic barriers that exist. So when I say disability justice, what do people here think about disability justice? What do you think it means, or what is it?
Removing those systemic barriers.
Justice for everyone,
Anybody who's, go ahead, Donna.
complying with the ADA,
Okay,
promoting for inclusion.
okay. So a lot of this is I'm actually going to avoid the ADA. I'm going to avoid talking about Americans with Disabilities Act. I'm going to avoid the fact that in 1973 was pretty much the first time people with disabilities were given some sort of a status in our society with the Rehabilitation Act of 1973. Yeah. Section 504 of the Rehabilitation Act. But we were not given a legal status until 1990, when the Americans with Disability Act was signed into law by George Bush, of all people. The reality is, yeah, we're in a progressive center. It's one of those things. But it was a very progressive piece of literature. And I do have on the resource list that I've compiled for this a history of the laws and practices and things like that. But for here, the laws are great, they're important, but I want to get more into the heart of what disability justice actually is. So the ADA was a civil rights focus. During 2005-ish, disabled activists of color from communities of color got together and started discussing a newer second wave framework of disability justice. These included the people that were in the video earlier, Patty Byrne, Leroy Moore, Stacy Milburn, Ellie Claire, Sebastian Margaret. And to quote Patty Byrne, well, I can also explain the picture real quick before I go into the quote. This is more ADA focused, but there are pieces in the, basic access to every house. There's a movement currently going on that's called visitability, which would require that any and all houses built were accessible from the start. So new homes being built would need to maintain accessibility, no steps going up to the front porch, no, having the ramps, having access, because technically I've had people here that want me to meet them someplace in their home or go to their home, and pretty much I can't do it. And I won't even add in the limitations of paratransit in that, because, if it's after 6 o'clock in Santa Clara County, you may or may not be able to get home.
Accessible bathrooms too.
Yeah. So back to the whole reality of the space. The Collins Board has voted to create a fully ADA bathroom in the back, so that's progress. Yay, and we're working on things. So Patty Byrne and this group of activists, they got together. It was a group of, as I lose my place here, it was a disability collectives in Vancouver, Seattle, and New York as well that began discussing the second wave of disability rights. So Patty Byrne, in the description of what disability justice is, it's understanding that all bodies are unique and essential, that all bodies have strengths and needs that must be met. We know we are powerful not despite the complexities of our body, but because of them. We understand that all bodies are caught in these bindings of ability, race, gender, sexuality, class, nation state, and imperialism, and that we cannot separate them. These are positions from which we struggle. We are in a global system that is incompatible with life. There is no way to stop a single gear in motion. We must dismantle the machine. So to go a little bit further into what Patty Byrne and the group developed, it's Naomi Ortiz was another person who developed, a cross-disability framework. It needs to include all people of all different disabilities. It needs to not just focus on one or the other. It's about everybody. It also, is values access, self-determination, and an expectation of difference. So if I want to I support the right to choose, the option to choose the right to die. But what I do not support is when movies sensationalize that choice because a person becomes disabled. And in the process of, before they're even fully recovered and living a life, before they know what their life is about, they opt to pull the plug, or they show somebody else pulling their plug for them. So I'm for choice, but some people who are deaf want to stay deaf. Other people that are deaf want to get a cochlear implant. If the parent wants to get them a cochlear implant, that's within their rights, but there's a big contention within the deaf community on whether that's right or wrong. Another part of disability justice is to be our whole selves, all of our identities together, to not have to hide any one part of us, and to be the group to be more accepting of that. For all people to be more accepting of that. It includes space, though, for self-care, reflection, and hard discussions. So the self-care is an important piece of it because anybody with a disability has learned that we have to pace ourselves. I think anybody who's human knows we have to pace ourselves. And if one person is doing everything themselves and juggling too many, which I'm guilty of here sometimes, juggling too many things in the air, and that sets an example for other people that they need to be more than, or do more, or be more, and that's where self-care becomes reflection become important. So the disability justice also redefines beliefs about productivity, attractiveness, and the value of human life. At present, we're defined by what we produce in society. Prior to me coming to work here, I was on disability since 1994. So disability being the social program that I receive a check from the government to be able to somehow sustain myself with, but people would look down on me. I wasn't included in certain events in certain groups because, oh, you're on disability. We don't need to take care of you. And it's not about anybody taking care of me. It's about, the fact that I have an inherent worth and an inherent value all on my own. It doesn't matter what my abilities actually are. Disability justice goes beyond challenging what is considered normal. So normativity is something that you hear a lot in, I think, the lesbian, gay, bisexual, and transgender communities. But I think it's also appears everywhere. I mean, people are all different, and we need to embrace those differences. So it also addresses the fear of vulnerability, and an important piece of this is through interdependence. And in a little bit, I'll get a little bit closer, talk a little bit more about those specific pieces, and I want to compare it to the peace economy from Code Pink as well, because I think you'll see a lot of overlap between the different concepts. So this is just a summary statement on the disability justice framework. It's practiced on an individual, cultural, and societal level. It asks us to be responsible for both what we do to make changes and how we go about doing the work to make it. The focus, expanding from education and advocacy around systems and attitudes to working with other oppressed groups, educating ourselves and creating solutions, and community power that can serve everyone. If we leave somebody behind, they're not adding to the collective power of what we're doing. And this was, again, by Naomi Ortiz. And I have, I think I said, that I have a resource list that everybody can take, or I have a folder that you guys can get an electronic version of it. A lot of my materials came from a book that I ordered from Sins Invalid, which is called Skin, Tooth, and Bone. It's the basis of movement in our people, a disability justice primer. It really does a good job of giving you the basics of the things that I've covered today. And there are 10 principles I can go over fairly quickly because I think I've covered most in my beginning phases of what I've been talking about. So intersectionality, it's important that we do not live single-issue lives, as Audre Lorde states, but ableism is coupled with white supremacy, it's supported by capitalism, it's underscored by heteropatriarchy, and it's rendered the vast majority of the world invalid. Leadership of those most impacted. So this is where I say that, Together We Will does an awesome job of organizing with other groups and joining in those efforts. And that's what a lot of people need to do, and a lot of groups do, but sometimes our own personal for me personally, my internalized ableism ends up acting against me, or I have a lash out or something like that. The 10 principles of disability justice include an anti-capitalist politic, and that's in that, you know, we're all of value and worth, and it's not about what we're producing. Commitment to a cross-movement organizing, so I don't just want to organize with disabled people, I need to organize across the spectrum so that all people are included and all types and whatever. Recognizing wholeness, and this is back to the inherent worth outside of what I can produce. And it's important to, you know, value everybody and remember to value everybody. Sustainability, we have to pace ourselves. Commitment to a cross-disability solidarity. Within the disability community, you can get different sections that are either accepted or not accepted, and this group doesn't like what this group does, but we all kind of need to find a way to join together. Interdependence. Part of why I've been successful here at the center is because I have people supporting me here. It's become my own little supportive group that I see on an ongoing basis, and the people that keep me sane, amongst other things, you know, if you can call me sane, because I sometimes don't think I am. Collective access, you know, everything needs to be accessible. I mean, we need to focus on that. We need to be a community with each other, and collective liberation. So this is the, on the left, we have the Code Pinks. They did a 21-day campaign on what the peace economy issues were, and they included connection, love, wisdom, imagination, attitudes, investigation, community, engagement, empowerment, resources, pleasure, sharing, quality, revolution, interdependence, and abundance. The one on the right is actually from the book, okay, your left, yep. So my right, my left, yeah, it works. I'm also slightly left-right impaired. Yes. Intersectionality, which is, you know, leadership of those most impacted. They're basically the issues that I've already mentioned before, but it's the interdependence, the collective action, access, and the collective liberation. There's crossover between these two groups. And part of me being here and part of what I believe in is if we were less of a war economy, we would be able to have more social programs and be more supportive of different people. So I think the two could be tied together, and that's what I'm doing here, which is probably outside the norm of disability justice, but I'm a little outside the norm sometimes. Yeah. Yeah.
The number one question, I'm sorry. The number one question I get whenever I talk to people about inclusion, which is an issue in special education, that's where I come from, and that, well, how do we pay for it? And I'm like, do you know all the stupid things we pay for when we could be doing this?
Yeah. So no, this is the questions, and this is what is important. Yeah. To talk about. I mean, how much are we paying right now for the investigations into Trump's mess, you know? But war is probably the biggest thing. So, yeah, and prisons, which the prison strike is currently going on, and the prisoners inside that are striking definitely need the support of people on the outside. And there's also a large number of people with disabilities that are prisoners and people that are getting arrested and killed on an ongoing basis. So now I'm going to get into this huge, like, complex diagram.
Whoa!
Which I have an article that those interested, I will give you a copy of this article. This is talking about the medical industrial complex. This is talking about just because I have a disability, I am not necessarily unhealthy. I am not necessarily sick. You know, we often think of people with disabilities in terms of what they're doing and what they've overcome. We see somebody who's disabled as a savior, as this person doing phenomenal things, as, you know, when in reality they're doing less than somebody else might be doing, but it's prescribed to them that, oh, they've overcome so much, There was another video that I'm not going to show because I didn't want to get too much into videos, but it talked about that. It talked about the hero and how we're not. Yeah, super person. Yeah, super crip. Yeah, exactly. And that's, I think, who actually did it too, is the little person who's from Canada somewhere. So the image is a lot to take in. The medical industrial complex is defined by the same group of activists, that I mentioned before, is about profit and not necessarily health and well-being. We often are going to the doctor and the doctor's ordering tests, not because we really need the tests, but because they own the testing company that's doing those tests. And it's linked, though, the medical industrial complex is hugely linked to eugenics, to forced sterilization, reproductive oppression, wars, prisons, immigration, slavery, colonization, and capitalism. It's not just about ableism, but it's about all systems of oppression. So to kind of describe the image a little bit more, you've got you've got the medical industrial complex, and underneath that there's profit, power, control, exploitation, ableism, oppression, violence, and trauma. And that's kind of what is part of that whole system. Then you have in the four corners science and medicine, health, safety in the bottom, and access down below. But each one of those links to a square that's in the center. Health is linked to desirability. Science and medicine is linked to eugenics. Access is linked to charity and ableism. Safety is linked to population control. So these are all kind of like tension points in our society and ongoing belief structures. And this is a very detailed image mapping out the oppressions that exist. It's definitely not something that can totally be absorbed just by me talking about it right here, right now.
I get a poster of that.
I have one, yeah. And I have the link to the article that explains it a little bit more in depth as well, which is a good thing because I figured that was important.
Yes, please.
Yeah. So, disability and health, you need to disconnect disability and health. When you see somebody using a cane, they're not necessarily sick. They're dealing with a complex chronic condition. Some people, when they're in crutches, they broke their leg. Okay, their leg's broken. It's healing. Is that a good thing or a bad thing? Or does it need to be anything, really, other than they need access in different ways? And that's kind of where I'm getting at the whole disability justice part of things. So is everybody absorbed enough of this for right now? Because I think it's, yeah. So moving on, similar to the power that the words in that presentation had, words have power too. People with disabilities, some of them will say I'm a disabled person, some of them will say I'm a crip, some of them will say I'm a cripple. Some people who use a chair, they'll say one thing. Somebody else who has the same exact condition deals with different words. Similar to in the trans community about, pronoun choices, ask how the person identifies if you really need to know that piece of things. Because really, does it boil down to what they're able to do, or does it boil down to, again, the inherent worth inside? There are people also with invisible disabilities that you wouldn't know necessarily walking into a room that they also struggle with some kind of limitation that bars them from participating in society as it's currently structured. So, there's also huge debates within the disabled community about, do we use person first or do we use identity-based language? Is somebody an autistic person or are they a person with autism? Each community is different. The only community that I know that has any type of a solid line on that would be the deaf community, in that they use deaf with a capital D to identify who they are, and that's a source of pride for a lot in that community. Personally, I would say err on the side of person first before jumping into you're a disabled person, you're this, you're that. Like I said, if it's even needed at all, just avoid it altogether. You can get to know a person without knowing what their impairment is. I have a couple of resources in the list that I put together of disability etiquette. One of them is from the United Spinal Association. It's, I think, more comprehensive than most, but I wouldn't say that it's the end-all, be-all expert on how to treat disabled people. But as other people here can probably say, there's not really any expert other than ourselves on our personal being. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time talking about different populations and different diagnoses or different limitations, and that's somewhat deliberate in all of this. I mean, disability doesn't have to be stigmatized. It doesn't have to be made into a problem, but our society is currently based on a medical industrial complex that's based in capitalistic practices that perpetuates the stigma that is attached to our bodies. When you see somebody with, excuse me, somebody who's pregnant can go up to a person and say, hey, would you mind putting that down, if they're smoking or whatever, they can go up to somebody and more than likely the person will be totally okay with it. But you have a person with multiple chemical sensitivities that goes up to somebody who appears totally able-bodied, nothing different about them, but they're coughing, hacking, or asthma, coughing, hacking, and they need to be somebody to move to a different chair. And it's like suddenly the pregnant person's okay to ask you to move, but the person with an impairment is not okay to ask you to move. So it's about our own judgments as well. And that goes back to the whole thing on visible versus invisible disabilities. And I struggled with invisible disabilities for years and years and years prior to them becoming visible. And so I've navigated both communities. And it's a big jump to take, and it's a big leap to kind of understand. And even, like I said earlier, to get over my own internalized ableism, because I didn't think I would fit in with somebody who was in a wheelchair, and then I ended up in a wheelchair, and then I had to really question and question and evaluate those realities. So I'm going to let you guys talk for a little bit.